This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Authorities in Cameroon launched investigations into grisly road accident that killed at least 37 people. South Africa's total COVID-19 cases crossed the 1 million mark amid new variant. And new studies in Kenya reinforces link between fast food and high levels of bad cholesterol. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Also coming up, joint AU-UN peacekeeping mission in Darfur to end after more than 13 years. And on our new series, Pandemic Warriors, we take a look at individuals who made a difference during the COVID-19 pandemic. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. I'm Richard Nta. So good to have you with us. Let's begin in Cameroon, where Cameroonians have been identifying and collecting bodies of family members who died in a bus crash on Sunday. The accident occurred in Nemale village, leaving at least 37 dead and 18 others injured. Local authorities say that the accident took place when the vehicle crashed into a truck after avoiding a crowd of people on the road. The bus was heading to the capital, Yaoundé. It was reportedly carrying over 60 passengers. The government has since ordered investigations into the cause of the accident. All right, now for more details on this, we are joined on the line by Franklin Sonne-Bayan, a local journalist in Douala. Franklin, thank you for keeping us company here on Africa Live. Let me begin by asking you, Franklin, can you give us an update on the accident and the latest on the ground? Franklin.
Yeah, okay. Right now, we're facing, first of all, a war on figures. You talked about 37. The government said 30. The local NGOs that are following up the matter have talked about, who are citing eyewitnesses, are talking about 52 victims in this accident. So there is a war on figures. Government actually give the right figures. We're not saying that the NGOs always get it right, but if you're citing sources on the ground. So there's a war on figures. The next thing is the government dispatched ministers related to this, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of the Interior, here called the Minister of Territorial Administration, where there is a Department of Disaster Control, who went to the scene, and of course the government, as usual, said they're going to take care of the victims, maybe help bury the dead, and also follow up on the treatments of the survivors. One of the main survivors, a curious survivor, is a little girl aged about 8. We'll be looking up to more details. This information doesn't flow very easily, especially when the government has, first control of access to this information. So there is the war on figures, and then there is the expectation, which hasn't always been met, that the government will take care of the victims as a promise.
All right, Franklin, we appreciate you staying on top of that story for us. The pictures there tell a grim story, is a story we shall be keeping a close eye on. That's Franklin Sonne speaking to us from Douala. We appreciate your insights. While staying in West Africa, at least 10 people, including 4 security personnel, have been killed in Boko Haram attacks in northeast Nigeria. The jihadist group raided 3 villages on Saturday in Borno State. Fighters in 6 trucks attacked the villages and set fire to homes and public buildings. Residents were fired at sporadically and forced to flee. According to the United Nations, Boko Haram and splinter group ISWAP have killed 36,000 people in the Northeast since 2009. And to South Africa now. Doctors are calling for another hard lockdown as a new COVID-19 variant spreads. The call comes as the country passed a grim milestone, recording over 1 million infections since the pandemic began. CGTN's Yulisa and Jamela filed this report. Let's take a look.
Concerns are mounting here in South Africa after record daily increases in infections this past week. The increases, according to the Health Ministry, are much higher than during the first wave peak in July. Those concerns have now led to growing calls for urgent interventions to take place. The South African Medical Association, or SAMA, wants the government to return to strict lockdown. The calls by SAMA come as President Cyril Ramaphosa is meeting with the National Coronavirus Command Council. After that meeting, it is expected that stricter lockdown restrictions will be announced. South Africa is currently under level 1 of the lockdown, the lowest of a 5-tier system. Under this level, most activities are allowed under strict rules.
We don't want a full-blown level 2. We want a hybrid type of, especially on the social gatherings, because that is where we have seen super spreaders come from, and we need to contain that.
The South African Medical Association is an organization that represents public and private sector medical practitioners. The association says the major issue with South Africans at large is lack of adherence to the current regulations, keeping up social distancing protocols or wearing masks.
We unfortunately cannot jail each and every one. We cannot prosecute each and every one. We need to come up with something else, And just as a thought, we think that either you need to be fined on the spot or then do community service. Go and work in those communities and see what it is like to suffer, and especially where people are sick. So we need to make people aware that they are responsible for their deeds, and while they can't or don't want to listen, let us then help them. As the system currently, the healthcare system, cannot survive this next 2 or 3 weeks if we don't do this.
Nurses have also been pleading with the public to adhere to the health protocols as hospitals can no longer cope with the second wave of the coronavirus.
What is actually of more concern to us is that the public sector hospitals are running on skeleton staff, as well as the private sector hospitals. And on top of the fact that this is a pandemic, we are also seeing a lot of people with alcohol and drug abuse and related incidences coming into the casualties, putting a further strain, motor car accidents, putting a further strain.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the nation in the next few days. He will possibly announce new strict regulations, especially for the period leading up to the New Year celebrations. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, staying in South Africa, the traffic chaos at the Beitbridge border between South Africa and Zimbabwe is easing. The blockage was caused by a new COVID-19 screening regimen conducted by a small team at the border that only operated from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Beitbridge is usually a 24-hour border post during high season. Angela Coppola has more.
South African authorities stepped in on the 26th of December and waived the screening requirement for truckers. The result, the queue on the South African side reduced to commercial trucks only, while on the Zimbabwean side, the queue of trucks and cars is estimated to be down to 1 kilometre. Brian Tepu from the Association of Christian Truckers of Southern Africa was ministering to truckers stuck in the border post. He's been watching the drama unfold at the border for the last week.
The situation has changed very considerably compared to the way it was before Christmas and days before that, where guys were spending 10 days in the queue and hardly moving maybe 50 meters, 10 meters a day. So the situation has changed quite a lot. More and more trucks are moving quite easily.
Drivers on both sides of the border were stuck in the queue, with many running low on supplies.
Some wanted to go to deliver and come back to their families, but they couldn't. So many were stuck in these queues over Christmas, which is not very nice, especially considering that they are also family men. Some of these guys are family men. Some of these guys, if you're spending 10 days on the queue, it means that you're also running out of the money, that the allowance money that you had.
The COVID-19 screening and testing bottlenecks on both sides of the border post could have been avoided.
This is not acceptable. Someone is supposed to arrive here because most of these things are coming in pre-cleared. So someone is just supposed to come here and just cross the same day. So I think we need to get rid of these bottlenecks. We need to be considerate of our brothers who are on the trucks. Unfortunately, in this side of the world, I don't think we get to really appreciate what truck drivers do for us.
The situation in the Beitbridge border post has returned to some level of normalcy. However, returning visitors to South Africa and a resumption of screening procedures could cause the chaos again. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
In Kenya, dozens of medical workers have died from COVID-19. Their deaths have left the relatives reeling from the loss. CGTN's Enoch Sokolia tracked down a Kenyan family that lost their son who worked as a periodontal surgeon. Let's take a look.
It is really paining. I never knew death could pain until you feel you are no more.
On the 30th of November, Dr. Hudson Alumera was laid to rest in his rural village in western Kenya. The dental surgeon died of COVID-19.
That's the time I felt COVID was real, and COVID is really with us, and it can kill anybody at any time.
Lying in an ICU bed last month, Dr. Alumera understood what was happening to him. Alumera had been a dentist at the Kenyatta National Hospital, where he also trained future dentists from the University of Nairobi. Within days of his last shift as a doctor, Alumera became a patient. Aged 37 years old, Dr. Alumera was alone in the intensive care unit, less than 20 miles from his wife and a 7-year-old son. No one was allowed into his ICU room, save for his doctors, nurses, and cleaners.
And he told me, just continue praying. My right lungs are damaged, but don't tell Mama Lee, please. Promise that you'll not tell Mama Lee that my lungs are damaged. That was the last message.
As he grew sicker, messages to his family became less frequent. In his last phone conversation with his mother, Dr. Alumera promised to be back, a promise he could not keep as he lost his battle against the virus.
I cannot remember what I did next. I only found people just full in my home. I don't know whether I removed my clothes. I was only shouting, my daktari, Hudson, you have deceived me. Hudson, you never told me the truth that you are going away.
Frontline healthcare workers face a high risk of contracting the coronavirus, and a number of them have become sick. Dr. Phoebe Juma has been on the front line of fighting COVID-19 since Kenya reported its first case. While battling the pandemic, she became a victim too. And after recovering, Dr. Juma is now helping even more of those fighting COVID-19.
You can't afford to give up. Yeah, who will be left to take up that burden?
The Africa CDC is urging African governments to shield doctors and nurses.
The number of health workers we have are few. It means we need to protect them very well.
His death meant that Kenya and the medical fraternity had lost a great doctor. But for his family, no value can ever be placed on his death. That is because he was a father and a breadwinner, not just for his immediate family, but for his siblings as well.
When I heard that nobody will be allowed to see even the body, it pained more. I could not accept the reality. How do I bury somebody that I have not seen?
Enoch Sokolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
In other news, the World Health Organization says that a lot is to be learned from the coronavirus pandemic. The WHO Director General said many nations were ill prepared to deal with the virus despite earlier warnings.
First, all countries must invest in preparedness capacities to prevent, detect, and mitigate emergencies of all kinds, whether they be natural occurring epidemics or deliberate events. Strong primary health care is especially important at the foundation of universal health coverage and at the eyes and ears of every health system. Second, true preparedness is not just a job of the health sector. It requires an all-of-government and all-of-society approach. And third, the pandemic has highlighted the intimate links between the health of humans, animals, and planet, which we can only address with a One Health approach.
All right, time now for a short break, but when we return, lots more news coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. Joint AU-UN peacekeeping mission in Darfur to end after more than 13 years. And new study in Kenya reinforces link between fast food and high levels of bad cholesterol.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
With a contraction of 3%, 2020 is the worst year on record for sub-Saharan economies. In countries as diverse as Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, unemployment rates soared and incomes fell. 2020 was the year when the continent's first pandemic-era sovereign default happened, reminding Africa about a long-ignored debt crisis. But 2020 was so much more than just a year of economic pain. Join us as we explore the highs and the lows of 2020 and what lies ahead on Global Business Africa.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Thanks for staying with us. Well, following weeks of protests, Tunisia's Justice Department agreed to cover the cost of COVID-19 treatment for judges. The judges' strike, which began on November the 16th, has left Tunisian courts paralyzed. And Shawalshi reports.
During an unprecedented general strike, over 3,000 judges took to the streets. Protesters in the capital, Tunis, and across the North African nation demanded better working conditions, salary hikes, and reform of the justice system.
We respect the state and its institutions, but the state must respect the judicial power. We rule in the name of the Tunisian people, not in the name of politicians, businessmen, or financial lobbies. We are defending our rights, but also the rights of the people. With better means and working conditions, we can better serve the population.
The Minister of Justice called on judges to take into consideration the country's financial situation and the current economic crisis, which is the result of several years of instability and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Tunisian judges don't want to get rich. We are the ones fighting corruption and risking our lives during the pandemic. The graft door was shut by magistrates. We want to safeguard the judicial system and protect it from the network of corruption. The courts need more means to fight corruption as well as terrorism.
Following 1 month of protests, an agreement was finally reached with the government. According to the government, it guarantees health protection and adjusts the financial situation of magistrates to international standards.
The agreement also provides for the establishment of a protocol taking into account the specificities of judicial work, besides fundamental reforms to be carried out in the sector. Tools will be put in place to strengthen the autonomy of this power, including upholding the principle of financial security for judges.
According to the Ministry of Justice and the Syndicate of Judges, the courts were supposed to resume work this week. However, new strikes were announced by unions representing court clerks, judicial police agents, as well as magistrates at the Court of Accounts. These strikes are expected to block the Tunisian judicial system in January.
A sudden surge in the number of COVID-19 infections among Tunisian judges pushed the syndicates to go on strike since November. Analysts assert that the new agreement with the government was necessary. However, it could encourage more unions to paralyze the country's public administration and the economy with new strikes and sit-ins. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
A joint United Nations and African Union peacekeeping mission in Sudan's Darfur region will end on December the 31st, more than 13 years after it was established. The UN Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution that terminates the mandate for the mission known as UNIMID. Yasser Hakim looks at why UN forces were deployed in Darfur and expectations after their exit.
The end of the UNAMID mission is a turning point for Sudan after nearly 2 decades of infighting in Darfur.
When the fighting intensified in Darfur from 2003 to 2007, the UN decided to send a military force. At the time, there were 26,000 personnel, including policemen, army soldiers, observers and experts. There was also an African Union force of 9,000 personnel. It was supposed to be a one-year mission. However, the forces have remained until now because of the escalation in fighting and the worsening situation in Darfur.
The forces were not only on a military mission, but also coordinated humanitarian aid and medical supply to refugee camps. Following the ouster of Omar al-Bashir, the transitional government said it has the ability to secure Darfur. In turn, the UN Security Council approved Khartoum's request to pull out the UNAMID forces from the North African country. But some experts are skeptical about maintaining stability in the restive region after the exit of peacekeepers.
There's a lot of talk that the pullout will create a huge void on the peninsula. Even after the signing of a peace accord between the government and armed groups, there are still skirmishes and divisions on the peninsula. Leaving at this time threatens to create a security vacuum because the peace accord stipulates establishing a joint force between the government and armed groups in 90 days, but it hasn't materialized yet, and that puts the region in danger of chaos.
UNAMID forces are expected to leave Sudan over the next 6 months, with hopes the government would have set up an alternative military presence in the region. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
While staying with health matters, the festive season is often a time to indulge in making merry. But this year, experts have warned of a worrying trend. The Kenya Food Index Report 2020 shows that office and home food deliveries in Nairobi grew by 25% earlier in the year, with mostly female clients ordering fast food regularly, an inclination that poses possible health risks. CGTN's Wilkerson Yabwa has that report.
'Tis the season to be merry, and food and festivities go hand in hand. As the holiday season continued, we visited an eatery in Nairobi where we found city residents lining up to enjoy some hot, crispy and tasty chicken.
We normally marinate our chicken, so that's what they most like about this place.
For this family, it was an exciting treat. But in recent years, fast food has become more than just an occasional indulgence, especially for women in the city. A recent research showed that 70% of women classified as upper middle class consumed sausages, chicken with skin, and deep-fried chicken daily. While some say they are often too busy to prepare a meal, others can simply afford the treat.
I just really like chips. They are tasty and they give me a certain feeling.
The study by the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, Kenyatta University and Mount St. Vincent University, Canada, shows that women employed for office work were 4 times more likely to have elevated cholesterol. Now, fast food is popular because it's convenient, it's easy, and it's certainly tasty. It is a treat that one can indulge in every once in a while. At the eatery, more women than men lined up at the counter.
Mostly in the evening is when we have most customers coming in. During the day, the flow is not that much, but in the evening when most of the middle-aged people, when they are leaving work, they pass by picking as they go home.
According to the Kenya Food Index Report 2020, as the country grappled with the COVID-19 pandemic, office and home food deliveries in Nairobi grew by 25%, with most orders comprising fast foods. Chicken was the most ordered food, particularly in Nairobi, followed by burgers, pizza, roast meat and bhajia. Left unchecked, this could raise cholesterol and cause health problems.
So you end up finding that you have excess weight, and the excess weight has got its repercussions, because the first thing it does, it will overburden your system. It will overburden the kidneys. It will increase the workload for the heart, which means the heart will beat more. It might be the start of a future problem.
High cholesterol can lead to strokes or heart attacks. Experts, however, say the key is not to eliminate all fast foods, but to find a balance.
Because what we are calling junk is still taken from the variety of foods that we have. Chips are made from potatoes. Is potato junk? It isn't. But the method of preparing those potatoes and the amount you eat and the frequency of the eating is what has given it the new name. Because the chips can still be taken as part of a healthy diet.
Across the city, eateries work to keep families fed. Food, when consumed in moderation and balance, is a way to comfort and to nourish and to heal. And during an unusual festive season, it is a balm, bringing loved ones together and helping them celebrate the gift of life. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
And we're not done just yet. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's a look at what's ahead. Coming up, our new series, Pandemic Warriors, a look at individuals who made a difference during the COVID-19 pandemic.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back, everyone, to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Richard Nta. Well, history indicates that past pandemics have reshaped humankind in profound ways on social, health, and economic sectors globally. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic, CGTN Africa brings you a series of features on some key individuals who made a difference in the battle against the pandemic. Here is Lindy Mtangana and Rama Nyang with the first installment of CGTN's Pandemic Warriors.
The year 2020 has been one of the most challenging in our lifetime. The coronavirus pandemic has kept the world in a near constant state of fear and vigilance and taken away lives and livelihoods. But amidst the suffering, the pain and the fear, we've also witnessed the endurance of the human spirit, resilience and selflessness. In the special series, CGTN Pandemic Warriors, we celebrate some of the amazing people on the African continent who exhibited heroism in the midst of a pandemic. I'm Lindy Mtongana.
And I'm Ramanyang. We certainly have some very interesting, inspirational stories lined up for you from pretty much all corners of the continent.
Now, Rama, what a year we've had. I mean, I'm sure you remember ringing in the new year back in December 2019 without a clue of what was to come in 2020.
Indeed, it certainly feels like an entire 5-year window has passed in the last 12 months, doesn't it? But the fact of the matter is, Lindy, like the rest of the human race, this continent has been waiting with bated breath for COVID-19 vaccines to bring back some semblance of normalcy, to return the smiles back to our faces instead of hiding them behind our masks. In the meantime, though, Lindy, we do have a lot of inspiration to come through from lots of people, from ordinary citizens to leaders at the very top.
Amazing stories from all corners of the continent. Let's get into our first pandemic warrior, a Ugandan engineer who is also a chef and has been running a rather unique ambulance business during this pandemic. Now, the ambulance has not been rushing people with medical emergencies to hospital, but rather supplying cooked meals to the hundreds of patients and health workers in hospitals. Damba Muhammad and his family prepare and distribute the food free of charge, and the food ambulance has the capacity to serve around 400 people in a day. CGTN's Michael Baleke brings us that story.
Responding to a health crisis, Damba Muhammad has been driving this ambulance at least once a week since Uganda announced its first case of COVID-19. But it's not your usual ambulance that handles medical emergencies. It's a food delivery van which Damba designed himself.
They told me that they are selling the ambulance. I said, let me buy it. I didn't buy it at the time of COVID, but I had the vehicle before. I brought it and I abandoned the vehicle there. When the epidemic started, it's when I started building the idea on it. What inspired me is when the president called to everybody to do what he can so that we can fight this epidemic. Because I had the idea of cooking and at the same time I can do the engineering, I sat down with my family and I set that food ambulance so that we can take food in hospital when they are still hot.
Damba is a ground engineer at Entebbe International Airport, but his love for cooking gave him ideas about the food ambulance.
Everybody is surprised when they hear that I'm an engineer at the same time I'm a chef. Engineer, all our family were engineers because our father was the chief engineer for the company in the 50s. So we all grew when we were engineers. Being a chef, when I went to UK, I worked in a food company for 7 years. So I was promoted up to a rank of chef tester. When I was still in India, the side of Pakistan, I used to cook. I learned how to do their cooking.
And Damba's cooking experience became more prominent as Uganda went into lockdown following the outbreak of COVID-19. Every once a week, Damba hits the market to buy assorted items from vegetables to meat, rice and fruits. At home, Damba, as the chef, is assisted by his spouses and children to prepare the food.
I felt so good when my husband brought forward this proposal. In this home, we love to cook, and we usually offer free food handouts to those in need. So I supported him because people are in a very bad situation. In Islam, when you give, God blesses you with more. Praise be to God.
When the cooking is done, the food is loaded into the ambulance's built-in flasks to keep it hot. It is then driven to designated COVID-19 treatment centers and healthcare facilities where it is distributed to frontline health workers and patients.
We are used to receiving ambulances, bringing in casualties, bringing in patients, but this time, actually ambulances carry patients, but this time around, the ambulance is bringing food. The food theater, it is an initiative, a new development in Uganda, an ambulance bringing food. It's great.
I'm loving the service because some of our workers here, at times they are financially not stable to access the food. So in case they get such an opportunity, it's really a good one. So I'm going to also take this opportunity to taste the food because just seeing it, it looks good.
We thank Haji Damba for the food he has given us. The food has come at a time when we most need it. We thank him so much because this has come from the bottom of his heart. He is a good man and may God reward him because some of us cannot afford such a meal.
Damba has been doing this for 10 months. This is Damba's food theater with a holding capacity of 400 meals. From meaty to vegetarian options, there is a variety of dishes to choose from.
The food is 100% free, 100% free. I had my saving. I said, okay, let me spare some.
Uganda continues to register a spike in COVID-19 cases and deaths. But Damba says this is a calling and pledges more support to the needy as long as he can afford it. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, sometimes it really is just the small things, a little bit of compassion from a next-door neighbor or a gesture from a friend at work that can make the world of difference for both individuals and communities, Rama.
That certainly is the case, Lindy. And the fact of the matter is simple acts of everyday kindness have always set Africa as a whole apart. And now that's proving to be even more crucial than ever in the face of unprecedented adversity. Many leaders from across the continent were not left out in the fight against COVID-19. One stood out to be counted through a mix of effective policies covering everything from community mobilization, adherence to protective measures like washing our hands regularly and keeping our masks on, to better use of science and tech in minimizing the economic damage to citizens brought about by pandemic restriction measures. This is our outstanding leader's story. Take a look.
Rwanda, a country with a population of about 13 million people, has the lowest number of COVID-19 cases and fatalities. President Kagame has had a hands-on approach to the crisis, receiving and analyzing data daily, making his country the first in sub-Saharan Africa to take containment measures. On March 19th, the country recorded its first COVID-19 case. But even before this, in February, the country was already putting in place protective measures. In Kigali, testing labs were already operational.
We get them, I think it was on before 10th February, if I recall very well, beginning February. So far we can test these new coronaviruses. What remains to sustain that laboratory supply. Because it's new, they are rare on the market. So this is where we are now maneuvering here and there to compile the stock.
As one of the fastest growing economies on the continent, Rwanda has earned a reputation for innovation in many sectors, including healthcare, which has an excellent response system. Dr. Jose Nyamusore works at the Rwanda Biomedical Research Center in charge of the country's epidemic surveillance and response division. He says the experience Rwanda had combating Ebola helped them in readiness for COVID-19.
We keep adapting ourselves on the reality of the epidemics. And as I said, this comes after just where the Ebola is dropping. So we train a lot of people. And the training does not only provide capacity, but it provides also the alertness to healthcare workers. So once you train someone on the highly pathogenic disease, it stays there, not only for that disease, but for any other disease.
To further strengthen its fight against COVID-19, The government of Rwanda introduced robots that help doctors collect data in the medical facilities from patients and use the same technology in airports to reduce contact and exposure to the virus.
Hello, I want to take your temperature. Okay.
If all together we join our efforts, we can fight anything that can happen.
While hopeful for a global solution to the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, we celebrate countries like Rwanda on the milestones they have made in containment of the virus.
It's hard to believe that one tiny virus has impacted nearly every person on the planet. In fact, Ramba, it's something we certainly never imagined would happen in our lifetime.
Indeed, it's one thing to read about massive public health emergencies like the Black Death back in the 1600s, a massive outbreak of the bubonic plague. And it's another thing entirely to actually live through a massive public health emergency of this nature, at this scale, and then have to completely rewrite your entire life and work balance in order to adapt to it.
Absolutely. I mean, living through it actually teaches you a lot about yourself. I mean, certainly for me, in the early days of this pandemic, I struggled to adjust to this new isolation that we were forced into. Travel restrictions, working from home, curfews. It was all quite unnerving for me at the start of all of this.
Indeed, I'm sure it was for billions of us really around the world. And you start seeing that showing up in the data that we came across on the business desk. So for instance, you've got parents who are used to a very specific routine, wake up in the morning, prep the kids for school, they're off to one location, you're off to another to actually get your work done. But now, because of this pandemic, you're all in one location and you somehow have to get your work done, but at the same time supervise the learning that your children are doing virtually online. For those of you who could actually afford to have that alternative to switch over to virtual learning.
And we were some of the lucky ones, isn't it? At the end of the day, we kept our jobs. Our livelihoods fundamentally did not change, and we were always safe and healthy.
In the span of roughly 6 months, the unemployment rate in this country basically tripled. There's a lot of damage, both on a social level, on an economic level, that this pandemic has done, and that might take years to fix.
And that damage is certainly very personal, Rama. I mean, these are stories that each and every one of us will carry, stories that we will tell about the lessons that were learned in this pandemic, and of course, lessons that will be handed down for generations to come. 10 months on, Nigerians share their experiences on lessons learned during the pandemic. For this and more from other countries, here's today's segment, Voices of the People.
In 2020, I wanted to have everything that I don't have, but now I have learned to appreciate what I have. I wanted to, in terms of enterprise, expand business. I do events and photography and videography, but then those were the first things that were banned when the pandemic came in. I actually turned my house into a photo studio, so I had to use what I have.
We hope our government will prioritize the improvement of our healthcare system in 2021. We've had many epidemics. Our leaders should strengthen our health services by building hospitals that meet international standards and schools so that we can have a bright future.
We've proven to ourselves that actually we're quite resilient, without those things, without the luxuries of life. Probably taught us to be a lot more frugal in our spending, certainly given us more time with our families, to bond with our families and just not take for granted, time.
By any measure, 2020 has been a year of uncertainty and harsh economic realities. But many of us prevailed, some through sheer force of will, and others through the help of those who simply refused to give up entirely on humanity.
Well, yes, indeed, Rama. In fact, here in Kenya, millions of people found themselves at breaking point as the economic impact of pandemic restrictions took effect. But in the sprawling slum of Kibera, hope arrived in the form of Moses Omondi. His Adopt a Family campaign saved nearly 3,000 people from utter despair. Here's his story.
Home to an estimated 250,000 people, Kibera is one of the largest urban slums in Africa. With overcrowding, poor infrastructure and limited access to essential services, it's just the kind of place many expected would suffer a massive wave of COVID-19 infections. But for the majority of people here, their biggest concern this year has been putting food on the table.
Remember, most places closed down, including hotels, construction sites, and these basic places where people will go and earn money per day, even going out to wash clothes. So this affected a bigger percentage of people here.
A long-time community organizer and Samaritan, Moses Omondi felt compelled to find a way to help those worst affected by the wave of job losses that accompanied COVID-19 restrictions.
And I thought, what can I do? So should I give them work? The directives could not allow. So can we give food? Yes, that one is a basic need. That no matter the epidemic, people will still need food. So I thought, why don't I look for a family that is capable and we get food for those that are not able to get.
And thus, the Adopt a Family initiative was born, by simply connecting those who were struggling to make ends meet with givers from across Kenya and beyond. Moses was able to help thousands of people in Kibera with direct donations and food vouchers.
I first met Moses during this COVID pandemic. At the time, I was really struggling because my wife had cervical cancer and I could not afford to take her to hospital. Moses gave us vouchers for food and supporting my wife. Even though she died in August, I am thankful because they have kept on visiting and just checking on how we are progressing. Every month, they support us through the vouchers so that the kids can eat.
Adopt a Family also supports small businesses in Kibera.
I'm a teacher, and when COVID came, I'm teaching in a private school, and when COVID came, so we were told that the schools will not continue. I'm a mother of 4, so it was hectic. There's a group of teachers which Adopt a Family supporting. He gave me 5,000.
During COVID-19, if we wouldn't have been careful, many children would have suffered from, they would have been malnourished. And number 2 is also, we've been able to give these families hope that you can have someone who doesn't know you to stand with you. Some of the families we supported, we didn't even know each other at all. And we ensured that the genuine families got the services that we were offering.
A man of the people, Moses' tireless efforts have certainly saved lives during this pandemic, while also spreading hope.
Lindy, that was a pretty compelling piece. What went through your mind? What are your impressions, your key takeaways when you went to do that piece in the field?
Well, I think the thing that struck me, and heard a lot of conversation about how people had anticipated that spaces like Kibera would simply crumble under this new coronavirus pandemic, overcrowding, communities living in poverty. But what I found walking around with Moses was that, firstly, he's so well loved and so well known in the community. But what that really exemplified was how this community is strong together. That was my key takeaway from it all.
Well, the way we'd put it here, it's simply Ubuntu.
Yes, Ubuntu in action.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And that really one of the best things about this pandemic. It's brought out that spirit of selflessness among us. On this exclusive CGTN segment, here's a powerful voice from Chikwe Ehekweazu. He's the head of Nigeria's Center for Disease Control, brought to you by CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Good to have you.
Thanks.
Now, how would you rate Africa's resilience during the pandemic?
Very early on, many leaders in Africa made some very hard decisions about shutting down their countries, literally. If you understand the economic reality of many countries in Africa, and we knew that we couldn't really afford the scale of the outbreak we were seeing in Western Europe at the time. We still got our fair share, and worked very hard then by also limiting travel within countries, across countries. Very painful decisions, economically very difficult for people.
How much efforts would you say are big at the time to secure vaccines for Africa?
Some of the early ones that results have been announced provide unique challenges for our continent in terms of the requirements on refrigeration, the logistics involved, the very cold temperatures required. To be honest, we are looking forward to a few more announcements. There's a few that don't require that level of refrigeration. So what we are doing primarily is working with a collaboration called COVAX, and that's brought together CEPI, Gavi, two global health organizations with WHO, and through them we have our first entry point into the location. A number of vaccines hopefully will become available next year.
And how should Nigeria and in fact Africa, appreciate some of those who have done extraordinary works during this pandemic? Now, what for you has been the most outstanding?
Very often you hear about people that got infected because they didn't have the personal protective equipment that they needed, the gloves, the masks, the gowns, to provide the care. But they're confronted with a patient that is going down, and they know they have to do that work. So to me, they're often not in the limelight. They often work long hours unrecognized. And I think in a way we've got to put them front and center of the discussion.
Of course, there was a somber mood and isolation that came with the pandemic, but some unexpected consequences too, especially because of the fact that human activity slowed down on an unprecedented scale.
Indeed, I don't think there's anything quite comparable in this particular instance. And nature gave us a very powerful statement as far as the human race is concerned. So then, let's turn to our special segment on pandemic's gift to nature. We show you some of the unexpected effects on air. All right then, so air quality. One thing that this particular pandemic has done is that it's provided a massive natural experiment that essentially asks what happens if you take all 7 billion of us and you tell us, slow down, don't move around for a significant amount of time. The results, I think, speak for themselves. This is a combination of before and after pictures from different parts of the world, Lindy.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, as you said, what kind of, what would happen in this experiment when you remove humans? And this answer really speaks volumes. I mean, just have a look at these images.
Indeed, fascinating stuff. So let's start with India, right? So Mount Dalauda, this particular photo, the one at the bottom where you can actually see the mountain range, that was taken from about 160 kilometers away. And this gives you a very clear sense of just how bad the air pollution problem in India was.
I mean, in this top picture here, that mountain range looks like a plume of smoke possibly, or a cloud in the distance. So it's quite amazing that when you remove that pollution, you're actually able to see just the sheer beauty of the surroundings of this particular part of India.
Indeed, and of course this is a part of the Himalayas that we often just see when you're flying over it, not actually seeing it up close. Pretty much the same thing happening in India, in New Delhi. You look at these shots of Delhi, and the one at the top is what we normally think of, right? That's our stock shot of India. A lot of hazy air, a lot of air pollution, but then shut down the city for a bit. And look what happened. I
mean, it's almost like a screensaver kind of shot, right? This brilliant blue sky, birds flying. It's a beautiful shot of Delhi, and one that has only been achievable because of these lockdowns during this pandemic.
Indeed, and of course our last shot comes from Milan. Italy, of course, one of the hardest hit countries by COVID-19, especially in the early days. This is essentially one of the industrial heartland cities. Again, massive, massive difference. The air pollution that used to be there before the lockdown, completely gone.
Absolutely.
When everyone slows down.
And as you mentioned, one of the hardest hit countries in the beginning of this pandemic, of course, tourism was completely shut down, one of Italy's most important economic drivers. And even that alone, the lack of people, the lack of cars, had really changed the entire environment of this major city in Italy.
Indeed, and this really is a summary of just how big, how pervasive our footprint as a species tends to be on this particular planet. If this is not a strong wake-up call for all of us to do better, I really don't know what is, because we can and we must certainly do better.
Absolutely, Rama. In fact, to live through a pandemic is to see humanity and indeed the world we live in like we've never seen it before. And so, although we hold on to our memories of this time that we've experienced, future generations will rely on videos and images to understand what we lived through. So here's a look now at some other iconic images of this pandemic taken across Africa. And that brings us to the end of our first episode of CGTN Pandemic Warriors.
That certainly is the case. It's the end of the first episode, but not the end of the entire series. This, remember, is a fragile continent that many expected would cave in from the blows of a new virus, a novel virus whose ferociousness did strike fear in the heart of many. But this is Africa. It's home to people who've refused to take this latest challenge lying down, and it's led by leaders determined to see their people through.
Our inspiring story continues tomorrow in the next episode of the Pandemic Warriors, where we feature those that have made themselves the bedrock of support in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, from those rushing the sick to hospital to those knocking on doors to help the overwhelmed, those who are struggling to cope with the new normal. That's all for today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Back to you in studio.
Well, that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Remember, you can send us your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. For the team, I'm Richard Nta saying thank you so much for watching, and we will be right back here, same time tomorrow. Till then, take care.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, global shares climbed today after President Donald Trump signed a $2.3 trillion spending package. Also, investors continue to celebrate a last-minute trade deal between Britain and the European Union. Pretty quiet day on the continent as activity slows down for the holidays. We saw South Africa's JSE seeing its main equities index declining, led by market heavyweight Naspers today. That's after Hong Kong-listed Tencent Holdings slumped today amid a widening Chinese antitrust probe of its technology sector. Now, also coming up on today's show. After hitting the 1 million mark for COVID-19 cases, South Africa could be headed for stricter lockdown regulations. EU member states have endorsed a trade agreement with the UK. And we take a bite out of South Africa's premium Wagyu steak with a sterling rating to match. Well, let's start off today's show in South Africa. The government is mulling over reinstating a ban on liquor sales. And that, of course, is following the surge in COVID-19 cases that have now surpassed 1 million. Restrictions on alcohol sales have been previously implemented to various degrees since one of the world's most stringent lockdowns was imposed in March. Now, the country has seen 3 record-breaking days of infections through December 25th, when it registered 14,796 new cases. The rapid surge has seen nations imposing travel restrictions to South Africa after a new strain of the virus was identified in the eastern part of the country.
Concerns are mounting here in South Africa after record daily increases in infections this past week. The increases, according to the Health Ministry, are much higher than during the first wave peak in July. Those concerns have now led to growing calls for urgent interventions to take place. The South African Medical Association, or SAMA, wants the government to return to strict lockdown. The calls by SAMA come as President Cyril Ramaphosa is meeting with the National Coronavirus Command Council. After that meeting, it is expected that stricter lockdown restrictions will be announced. South Africa is currently under level 1 of the lockdown, the lowest of a 5-tier system. And at this level, most activities are allowed under strict rules.
We don't want a full-blown level 2. We want a hybrid type of, especially on the social gatherings, because that is where we have seen super spreaders come from, and we need to contain that.
The South African Medical Association is an organization that represents public and private sector medical practitioners. The association says the major issue with South Africans at large is lack of adherence to the current regulations, keeping up social distancing protocols or wearing masks.
We unfortunately cannot jail each and every one. We cannot prosecute each and every one. We need to come up with something else, and just as a thought, we think that either you need to be fined on the spot or then do community service. Go and work in those communities and see what it is like to suffer, and especially where people are sick. So we need to make people aware that they are responsible for their deeds, and while they can't or don't want to listen, let us then help them. As the system currently, the healthcare system, cannot survive this next 2 or 3 weeks if we don't do this.
Nurses have also been pleading with the public to adhere to the health protocols as hospitals can no longer cope with the second wave of the coronavirus.
What is actually of more concern to us is that the public sector hospitals are running on skeleton staff as well as the private sector hospitals. And on top of the fact that this is a pandemic, We are also seeing a lot of people with alcohol and drug abuse and related incidences coming into the casualties, putting a further strain. Motor car accidents, putting a further strain.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the nation in the next few days. He will possibly announce new strict regulations, especially for the period leading up to the New Year celebrations. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, the traffic chaos at the Beitbridge border between South Africa and Zimbabwe is now easing. The blockage was caused by a new COVID-19 screening regime, which was conducted by a small team at the border that only operated from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Now, Beitbridge is usually a 24-hour border post during high season. Here's Angelo Coppola with more.
South African authorities stepped in on the 26th of December and waived the screening requirement for truckers. The result, the queue on the South African side reduced to commercial trucks only, while on the Zimbabwean side the queue of trucks and cars is estimated to be down to 1 kilometre. Brian Tepu from the Association of Christian Truckers of Southern Africa was ministering to truckers stuck in the border post. He's been watching the drama unfold at the border for the last week.
The situation has changed very considerably compared to the way it was before Christmas and days before that, where guys were spending 10 days in the queue and hardly moving maybe 50 meters, 10 meters a day. So the situation has changed quite a lot. More and more trucks are moving quite easily.
Drivers on both sides of the border were stuck in the queue, with many running low on supplies.
Some wanted to go to deliver and come back to their families, but they couldn't. So many were stuck in these queues over Christmas, which is not very nice, especially considering that they are also family men. Some of these guys are family men. Some of these guys, if you're spending 10 days on the queue, it means that you're also running out of the money, that the allowance money that you had.
The COVID-19 screening and testing bottlenecks on both sides of the border post could have been avoided.
This is not acceptable. Someone is supposed to arrive here because most of these things are coming in pre-cleared. So someone is just supposed to come here and just cross the same day. So I think we need to get rid of these bottlenecks. We need to be considerate of our brothers who are on the trucks. Unfortunately, in this side of the world, I don't think we get to really appreciate what truck drivers do for us.
The situation in the Beitbridge border post has returned to some level of normalcy. However, returning visitors to South Africa and a resumption of screening procedures could cause the chaos again. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And let's head to Nigeria now. The country's inflation rate has risen for the 15th consecutive time in November. That is according to data from the latest Consumer Price Index report released by the country's Bureau of Statistics. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with the details.
Nigerians are grappling with hard times as inflation rate soars to its highest in 34 months. Reports from the country's Bureau of Statistics show that it hit a record 14.89% in November 2020, a 0.66% increase from the previous month. Multiple factors, including the crash in oil price, land border closure, and disruptions induced by the COVID-19 lockdown, have influenced the inflationary pressure. And experts fault government's ineffectiveness in the management of the country's resources.
Some of those responses have been that the government has determined that the country has a revenue crisis, and that the revenue crisis is a question of that we have a shortage of revenue. The government has also determined that there is a lot of uncollected or untapped revenue sources. The revenue drive that is not so much focused as blocking leakages, because because really the challenge with the Nigerian economy is really not revenue. The challenge with the Nigerian economy is that there is a lot of leakage and wastage, and the fact that legitimate revenue are not being collected. Either because of the lack of capacity of the state, because of corruption, because of other loopholes, but legitimate revenue that are there, that are in the law, that have been there for decades, are actually not being collected.
Cost of food and air transportation recorded the highest increase. Although recent monetary and fiscal policies of the government have been targeted at reducing the surging inflation, inconsistency in policy has hampered meaningful progress.
The biggest challenge with bringing inflation down is really the inconsistency in government economic policies. So you have an array of economic policies, virtually most of which are actually working at cross purposes, contradictory to one another. And because they are contradictory, you can't see the impact that you want to really see. Your investment policy is such that it is not channeling appropriate investment to local manufacturers so that you can support local manufacturing. Okay? Your agricultural policy, for instance, is not channeled in a manner that is supposed to be linked to the industrialization policy.
Economists say Nigeria's budget is an expenditure framework that's not backed by targeted development planning. That makes it difficult to record actual growth, especially amid the current economic recession. They want government to consider an integrated approach to its economic planning. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's now take a look at today's corporate headlines. MTN Ghana says that mobile money aided the country in containing the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. The firm says it has reduced movement of people, which could have increased the risks of exposure. Now, as of December 24th, Ghana has about 933 active cases of COVID-19 and a total of 333 deaths. Meanwhile, the company Grand Parade Investments has encountered a stumbling block in a bid to sell its 95% stake in South Africa's Burger King. Now, the company says the offer it had received to acquire all the shares it holds in Burger King SA had now expired. GPI adds that a formal extension of the offer is being considered as it is urgently negotiating the sale and purchase agreement. And Tesla Incorporation will start operations in India as early as January. The electric car maker is expected to start with sales and then might look at assembly and manufacturing based on the response. Now, the first model to be launched by the company will be the Model 3, with prices starting at over $74,000. And Chinese authorities have advised Ant Group to return to its roots as a provider of payment services. The People's Bank of China adds that the company needs to understand the necessity of overhauling its business and come up with a timetable as soon as possible. The main purpose of the talks was to urge and guide Ant Group in a bid to ensure the protection of the legitimate rights and interests of consumers in the country. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still coming up on the show. Zimbabwe clears more than 10,000 ghost workers from its public service payroll. And Egypt ramps up its efforts to boost exporting its goods across Africa.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidu. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. With a contraction of 3%, 2020 is the worst year on record for sub-Saharan economies. In countries as diverse as Nigeria, Kenya and South Africa, unemployment rates soared and incomes fell. 2020 was the year when the continent's first pandemic-era sovereign default happened, reminding Africa about a long-ignored debt crisis. But 2020 was so much more than just a year of economic pain. Join us as we explore the highs and the lows of 2020 and what lies ahead on Global Business Africa.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now, where a biometric registration exercise has struck off more than 10,000 ghost workers from the country's public service payroll. Now, names of people who had died or left their posts but were still being paid are amongst those removed, as we see the South African nation seeking to cut recurrent expenditure and clamp down on corruption. Here's Farai Mwakutuya with more.
Government's wage bill has for long been a huge drain on national resources and an albatross to capital expenditure. Efforts to streamline its workforce and eliminate bureaucratic errors has seen the government undertake the biometric registration, whose dividends are now being enjoyed, with more savings expected downstream.
Once you begin to weed out things, you create a kind of domino effect, where you actually find out it's not only that, and hopefully that number will increase so that we can actually have a meaningful savings on the payroll. But one hopes that, through a biometric process, no new ghost workers can come on the payroll so that the problem cannot persist.
Government has reduced the share of revenue that recurrent expenditure, including wages, consumes to about 40%, but could see that figure go up due to constant demands for higher pay.
Because of inflation and because of the purchasing power of the money, they have to keep adjusting and giving them benefits to the to civil servants. But having reduced it to 40%, I think like a good figure would be 50-60% can go to recurrent expenditure or to salaries, so that we can we can see a bit of investment, which is currently happening now in infrastructure and the productive sector.
Austerity measures have not only freed up fiscal space, but also helped to narrow a budget deficit, which puts Treasury on a positive footing going into the new year. Authorities will aim to consolidate those gains by maintaining a tight leash on expenditures, restricting procurement and increasing revenue collections under a recently launched national development strategy. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Ministry of Trade and Industry has launched a project called Africa Bridges. It will facilitate procedures to increase the export of Egyptian goods into different markets on the African continent. Now, the plan is targeting 15 African nations with a wide range of products, from building materials to pharmaceuticals and furniture. Here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
According to official statistics, Egypt's exports to African countries account to less than 1% of worldwide exports to the continent. Experts say this is considered low for a country that is part of the continent and a member of free trade agreements such as the COMESA.
Egypt started to take certain initiatives, and Gusur is one of the very important initiatives to support Egyptian business people to penetrate the African market in a very well organized way, by different aspects, by different roles. We used to have a very successful personal initiatives, but we never been moved in an institutional way.
There are several challenges, however, for Egyptian companies that want to export within the continent.
The Egyptian companies' obstacles that are faced through the African market are the terms of payment. It needs to have export guarantees by banks and financial institutions. The second thing is also warehousing at the receiving of the goods in the African countries. There must be warehousing to receive the Egyptian goods.
Transportation is another obstacle. The first phase of Gusur project saw the launch of the Sukhna to Mombasa shipping route in 2019. It facilitates transport of Egyptian products to markets in East and Central Africa.
The Gusur project depends or work on the basis of taking the goods from the warehouses and from the factories in Egypt until the retailers and the wholesalers, factories and the logistic warehousing in Africa. This is by inland transportation, custom clearance, renting spaces in the vessels, also the export and the commodity insurance, door to door until the receiving of the goods into it will be all made as one package from the service providing companies.
Funded by the Islamic International Trade Funding Corporation and the Egyptian government, the Gusur helps in marketing and sales as well. Building material, chemicals, medical and pharmaceutical industries are just some of the products on the export list.
To penetrate certain markets with very special conditions like African market, it's not only the private sector that he should move alone. It's a sort of integration between the private sector and the government. If we look at certain countries who already presence in the African country in a successful way, you will find most of them that they are backing by the government and they get subsidy, they get support from the government to support them to be able to compete with others.
The first phase is targeting about 15 countries, such as Kenya and Ethiopia in the east, Senegal and Nigeria in the west, and South Africa and Angola in the south. With this extensive plan, the government is ambitious to raise exports to African countries by tenfold in the next 3 years. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Tunisia's tourism receipts have dropped by 64% to $700 million by December 10th. That is against $1.9 billion recorded in the same period last year. Now, this comes as COVID-19-induced travel restrictions take a toll on its tourism-dependent economy. From Tunis, here is Adnan Ashaushi with more.
Tunisia's vital tourism industry, which employs over 400,000 people and contributed to 16% of the country's GDP in 2019, is at a crossroads. In a bid to revive the ailing industry, the country's tourism and handicrafts minister Habib Ammar has declared that the government's priority is to work in the short term to protect it from collapsing and preserve the highest possible number of struggling tourism businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic.
The challenge is to save the tourism sector amid the coronavirus crisis which hit the whole world. We cannot resume a normal activity if the majority of businesses are permanently shut down. The health crisis will probably last for longer than we had expected. We must be resilient and cope with the crisis until we resume the activity gradually, when the vaccine is made available in spring of next year.
The government has proposed to pay the employer's social security contribution in the fourth quarter of 2020 and the first 2 quarters of next year, provided that jobs are kept and wages are paid by the hotels. This involves the wages of workers laid off, both fully or partially.
We have a short and medium-term plan to support the tourism industry by providing direct financial aid to thousands of workers and tourism professionals. The long-term strategy is based on boosting domestic tourism throughout the country.
According to the Tunisian Hotel Federation, the tourism sector, which is a critical pillar of the national economy, has faced serious damage due to the first and the second wave of the pandemic. Experts assert that thousands of families will endure at least 2 years of uncertainty.
We have tried to keep jobs and assume our social responsibility, but now it's impossible after a failed tourist season. We expect the loss of 27,000 people by the end of 2020 in the hotel sector. The crisis will have repercussions on the budgets of families. 6 families out of 10 will plunge into poverty because the head of the family earns a living from the tourism industry, while the rest will face extreme poverty.
Tunisian authorities have decided to grant tourism businesses an extension of the deadline for filing corporate tax returns for the years 2019 and 2020 until the end of December 2021, with a rescheduling of payment from January 2022. The initiative aims to solve the immediate cash crunch until the resumption of normal activity. Prime Minister Hisham Meshishi declared that the government will speed up the implementation of structural reforms in the tourism sector. A special committee will examine the structural problems, particularly the indebtedness, which is the result of several years of instability, as well as the COVID-19 crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're going to take a short break now, but still to come on the show. EU member states endorse a trade agreement with the UK. US President Donald Trump signs a $2.3 trillion pandemic aid and spending package.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain. Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there. There's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
At just about half past the hour, let's recap tonight's top headlines. A bus collided with a truck in western Cameroon, killing at least 37 people and injuring 18. Now, the incident happened on Sunday while the vehicle was heading to Yaoundé and was reportedly carrying about 60 passengers. The government has since ordered investigations into the cause of the accident. And at least 10 people, including 4 security personnel, have been killed in Boko Haram attacks in northeast Nigeria. The jihadist group raided 3 villages in Borno State on a Saturday. Now, fighters in 6 trucks attacked the villages and set fire to homes and public buildings. Residents were fired at sporadically and forced to flee. And a joint United Nations and African Union peacekeeping mission in Sudan's Darfur region will end on December 31st, more than 13 years after it was established. The UN Security Council unanimously adopted a resolution that terminates the mandate for the mission known as UN AMID. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's now turn our attention to some international news. The European Union member states have approved a post-Brexit trade deal with the UK. Now, this means the agreement can come into effect on January 1st, allowing tariff-free trade with Britain to continue after it leaves the EU single market at the end of this year. However, the deal still needs approval from the European Parliament, which is expected to be granted in February. Britain's Parliament is also expected to approve it on Wednesday. And in the U.S., President Donald Trump has signed a $2.3 trillion pandemic aid and spending package. The measure restores unemployment benefits to millions of Americans and avoids a government shutdown. Here's CGTN's Edis Tiansen reporting.
This is the second largest relief package that's ever been approved by the Congress. Roughly $900 billion will go towards relief programs and assistance programs because of the pandemic, and additional funding for vaccine distribution efforts. And on top of that, it also goes towards all sorts of government agency spendings for the better part of the next year, all the way through September. So this was a deal that was negotiated between the two parties for months. And finally, it was agreed on in the Congress. And very few people, if any, expected Donald Trump to refuse to sign it when it came to his desk to be signed into law last week. Now, at the time, he blasted the agreement, saying that there was a lot of waste of money going towards foreign governments and their militaries. And he also criticized the fact that the amount of money that was set for eligible Americans as a one-time cash payment was set at $600. He insisted that that amount should go up to $2,000, and even that was not a popular idea among his own party. Now, instead of taking this to the Congress and negotiating it with two parties, he actually went off to spend the holiday weekend in Florida at his golf resort. And now that it is signed, it will go towards not just for individuals cash payments, but also $300 additional unemployment benefits every week. It is also going towards assistance towards food and rent payments. And it also goes towards thousands of small businesses. It's going for relief to airline businesses. So really, this is the kind of deal that will benefit the majority of the Americans. Many are happy today to see the good news that it is finally approved, but many people are still asking the question why the president had to refuse the first time around and wait for this many days.
Now, 2020 was the first year of China's three-year action plan for state-owned enterprise reforms. The SOEs and their supervisors have taken substantial measures to implement reforms and have made considerable progress. Now, some of those measures were aided by funds specializing in SOE investments. Here's Song Yaoting taking a look.
At a recent ceremony, state-owned enterprises from both central and local levels subscribed 10 billion yuan to a new fund established in China's southwest Chongqing city. The money collected by this fund will be invested in firms and projects which are qualified as reform demonstrations among China's tech SOEs. The capital will be invested primarily in equities to accelerate mixed ownership reforms. The fund will be operated by China Reform Holdings Cooperation. The company's chairman said the fund will strive to meet its goals.
We will use our strength in operating funds to promote a good combination of technology and capital.
The fund is not alone in its process. By far, as much as 12 SOE reform funds have been established with a total value exceeding 1 trillion yuan. SOE reform is one of the priorities set for China's 14th five-year plan. The reform aims at modernizing governance of state-owned enterprises, improve market-oriented operation, and strengthen the existing supervision system by government agencies. It also promotes cooperation and fair competition between firms with different ownership backgrounds.
The SOE reform funds support organizational adjustment, innovation and development of state-owned enterprises. Firms that operate these funds should plan their investment well, prioritizing industrial and supply chains of China's emerging and underdeveloped industries such as semiconductor, electric vehicles, big data, and 5G.
Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Now, a forum on the digital economy has opened in Shanghai, sponsored by CGTN's parent company, China Media Group. Officials and industry insiders are exchanging ideas about a sector that has become a strong driver of China's economy. Here's Liu Xiaxin reporting.
In China, the digital economy has become one of the most frequently mentioned phrases of the year. While the Chinese have become accustomed to living with online services through their mobile devices, officials and industry insiders continue to explore the potential of the digital society.
We look forward to discussing how the digital transformation can better adapt to the development rules of megacities, effectively connect the capillaries of urban operation, and how the digital transformation can better practice the important idea of our cities and facilitate people.
China's digital economy has boomed in recent years, accounting for nearly 40% of its GDP. This year, the country has experienced a rapid economic recovery following the coronavirus outbreak and has reported positive quarterly growth. At the recent Economic Work Conference, top Chinese officials set out new plans and policies to further support the digital economy. In Shanghai, foreign participants called on traditional industries to adapt.
We will continue to build a world-class new mainstream media and constantly explore the industry chain of omni-media platforms.
Health codes and remote meeting and telecommuting are likely to become the norm, and we will continue to develop and launch new products in these areas.
In today's world, if we have only one thing to take with us when we go out, it'll probably be the mobile phone for most people. And behind this little screen are the efforts of countless companies and a collision of ideas like those expressed today. Liu Daxing, CGTN, Shanghai.
And now for an update on our top story tonight. President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that South Africa will return to level 3 of lockdown from 12 midnight local time. Now, the new regulations follow the rapid rise in confirmed cases and the emergence of a new strain of the pandemic in the country. All indoor and outdoor gatherings will be prohibited for 14 days from midnight tonight, except funerals, which will be limited to 50 people. The nationwide curfew has been extended from 9 p.m. local time to 6 a.m. Non-essential services have also been ordered to close at 8 p.m. local time. Now, under the strengthened regulations, the sale of alcohol has been prohibited. Distribution and transportation of alcohol will also be prohibited with some exceptions. The new restrictions are expected to remain in place until January 15th. Well, let's now turn our attention to Singapore. The country's handling of the pandemic was initially praised by the World Health Organization. The government quickly stamped out clusters and kept the economy open, but its golden image was soon stained when the virus ripped through overcrowded migrant worker dormitories. Now the situation looks brighter. Work has resumed in the country and better control measures are now in place. Miro Liu checked back in with some of those workers she spoke to earlier this year.
In April this year, the living conditions of migrant workers in Singapore came into spotlight after a massive surge in the number of COVID cases. 8 months on, we revisit some of the people we spoke to and try to understand how migrant workers are coping in the pandemic. While the rest of Singapore was gradually returning to normality, its 300,000 migrant workers who work primarily in construction and manufacturing spend most of the year confined to their densely populated dormitories or at government facilities. Even when they returned to work in August, they weren't permitted to visit any location outside of their dorm or workplace.
I miss the outside environment because I'm that person. In Sunday, I never stay at home. I just always go outside, meet my friend, go park or go hiking or cycling. But last 8 months, it's totally stopped.
After a slight easing of restrictions from 31st of October, the workers are now allowed to visit designated recreation centers.
I can exit pass apply only for Monday, and I can go recreation center. I cannot go another place, and only for 3 hours.
Treating workers as if they were just units of labor that you can use to create economic output, and then insist that they be locked down again as soon as the workday is over, and not even allowed out to see their friends or go to places of worship, which may be very important for their psychological health.
With many of them being the sole breadwinners for their families back home, months of lockdown with no work, coupled with the movement restrictions, took a massive toll on their mental health.
The difference between April and now is a lot of the mental issues. I mean, in the beginning, there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of lack of information. I didn't know what is going to happen, what will happen to even I was worried about what if my company had to close down. I will not get my salary. Eventually, end of everything, I had to go back to my country.
The government, on its part, has since set up a task force to boost mental health and provide support for migrant workers in need of help. It also plans to build new dormitories with amenities over the next few years to help reduce the density at existing dorms.
After this pandemic, actually, a lot of things changed. A lot of Singaporeans actually open their mind. They know our situation. I think hopefully this will impact in future also in our living condition. I hope our overall living condition will improve.
For CGTN, I'm Miro Liu in Singapore.
And moving on now, a well-preserved frescoed fast food counter is amongst the latest discoveries unearthed by archaeologists in Pompeii. Now, this ancient eatery helps to reveal dishes that might have been popular for citizens of the ancient Roman city. Take a look.
A thermopolium, or a fast food outlet which serves hot food, has been discovered among the ruins in Pompeii. While some 80 such eateries have been found across the ancient city, this one is the first to be entirely unearthed.
We started excavating 2 years ago. We found only a side of the bar which, among other things, has a beautiful painting of a nymph riding a seahorse. In my opinion, this is an homage to the nearby fountain, because this little thermopolium is on a little square.
Successful restaurateurs know that a good location can be crucial. and the operator of this ancient fast food outlet seemed to have scouted a good spot. Archaeologists also found a decorated bronze drinking bowl, ceramic jars used for cooking stews and soups, wine flask, and an amphora. One surprise find was the complete skeleton of a small dog. Pompeii was destroyed 2,000 years ago by a volcanic eruption. The ruins were not discovered until the 16th century, and the first excavation began in 1748. Pompeii is now one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Lin, CGTN.
Well, let's now take a look at commodity markets today, and they're pretty much reacting to U.S. President Donald Trump's signing of a coronavirus aid package and, of course, the start of a European vaccination campaign. Oil prices rose towards $52 a barrel today, as those two events outweighed concern about weak near-term demand in the market. Meanwhile, precious metals were livelier as we saw gold rising 1.3% at one point to a one-week high, with a weaker dollar lending further support. Shanghai copper prices advanced today for a third straight session. Now, traders say copper might rise further as the supply is still a little bit tight and there might be more monetary loosening as well in the future. Well, let's take a quick break now, still coming up on the show. We take a bite of South Africa's premium Wagyu steak with a sterling rating to match. And we show you how this Nigerian firm is bridging tech gaps in small businesses.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography. And a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Let's head to South Africa, where a piece of meat has scored an extraordinary rating that is the highest ever recorded in the country and perhaps even in the world. Now, a local Wagyu ribeye, which is a steak known for its superior flavor and quality, scored a marbling rating of 15. Stakeholders say it is a significant achievement that underscores the incredible growth the industry has seen. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with more.
Wagyu beef is considered as the best of the best, a premium meat that commands a premium price due to its superior levels of flavor. Now, South Africa's Wagyu industry has achieved a milestone by producing a piece of ribeye meat with a marbling score of 15, the highest ever recorded. The marbling is one of the signature traits of Wagyu that gives the meat its juiciness and flavor and also comes at a cost.
It has a premium of 20-30% above a normal patty, and the market easily absorbs that. The interesting thing for us, we thought we were going to struggle to sell the primal cuts, you know, the sirloins and the rib eyes and the fillets, etc., for 1,000 Rand a kilo. They're going now for 1,500, 1,800 a kilo and selling quite easily.
Over the last couple of years, South African industry has grown exponentially, going from 18 to over 150 producers, some with breeding herds of over 1,800 breeding cows. LA Farms is amongst them and produces premium Wagyu products for the market after entering the industry 4 years ago with the aims of pursuing ethical, sustainable farming.
Focus has been mainly on the local market, is that we've also realized that there is a need for high quality foods in the South African market, and to establish a great market here first, and then, you know, look at the export market. Because I think further down the line, South Africa is extremely well positioned geographically, as well as also from a cost perspective can be very competitive internationally on a lot of product, including Wagyu.
Even though Wagyu comes at a premium, it's appealing to more and more South Africans, and it's becoming more widely available as more players enter the market. While South Africa's beef industry has made inroads as part of the more than $10 billion in annual agricultural exports, Wagyu represents a very small fraction of that. Efforts are underway, though, to increase the exports to key markets around the globe, and the marbling rating of 15 has certainly caught many people's attention.
We see Africa as a market, and already there's quite a lot of product going into exclusive restaurants. We see the Middle East as a lucrative market, and some product has gone into the Middle East. Corona has obviously given us a bit of a setback, but that will open up again. And then Asia is also a market, and we've sent some product to Asia.
For now, the industry is still smarting from this significant achievement, and lots of work is going into producing the best Wagyu available that can compete easily with other traditional producers such as Japan. Navs Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Now, Nigeria has a rapidly growing tech industry providing IT solutions for various sectors across board. But there is still a huge gap as small businesses are not able to access the costly tech solutions. It is a problem that an indigenous tech firm in the West African nation is now trying to solve. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with this story.
Olumide Aturu has spent the past 2 years setting up his grassroots football club and consultancy firm. He has recently taken it to another level, deploying a mobile and web application that makes it easier scouting for players, organizing football competitions, among other things. Like several other businesses, his suffered a major setback as a result of the COVID-19 disruptions. But the app, developed by Skytes Technologies, is helping him keep his business afloat.
All the players downloaded the app, both on iOS and Android. What created a niche for us. The support which Zekat has given to us as a company, as a grassroots company, has helped us to extend to more states in the country. It has even given us more credence to attract more private investors, and then it has also given us opportunities to attract more youths in the country. And then we're optimistic that we can do more projects in the country through their support.
The app is the brainchild of IT expert Ayola Daudu. Together with his team, they've built apps that help small businesses function more effectively and at less than a third of the original cost. The COVID-19 pandemic need to close the technology gap in Nigeria. Ayola and his team also provide several budding entrepreneurs with emerging IT solutions, making them more profitable and sustainable.
The next piece of technology is called behavioral technology that has to do with artificial intelligence. So what we are doing is not about solving IT solution for people anymore. It is all about making the IT solution now behavioral. Can this IT solution interact with the person that owns the solution? So what we are doing here is making the solution we provide for interactive with those clients.
Part of the things that we talk about is how we can actually make a difference, what can we add to the country, the economy, and all of this stuff. So first and foremost, the government needs to invest more in technology because that's the future. You know, everywhere else is, you know, evolving every day. So for us, first and foremost, we're talking about having like making a lot of things, you know, affordable for small businesses, like apps and websites and all of that.
Small and medium-scale enterprises in Nigeria account for nearly 50% of the national GDP. But the health and economic shocks of COVID-19 have wreaked havoc to numerous businesses. Many are now to accelerate growth and are looking to IT firms like Skies Technologies to provide affordable solutions. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand opening slightly weaker on concerns over domestic coronavirus cases crossing the 1 million mark. Now, the rand was trading around 0.55% weaker against the US dollar, but it did continue to flit between positions of strength and weakness as investors tried to make sense of its prospects. In Nigeria, the naira remained stable against the dollar on the official market at around 392 per dollar. It did appreciate significantly against the dollar on the black market, closing at 465 naira per dollar as demand for foreign exchange drops in the country. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.